I would like to take this moment now and introduce our very own Professor Neil, who's going to take us through the first panel. Let's appreciate our Prof as he comes over. The Kenyan way will clap until he's here.
And I'm really not sure whether to sit down or stand up, but I think let me stand up. I'm not sure where there's a mic. These are not going to compete. Okay, cool. Right. So, hi everyone. And I don't know what was in Brian's head when he got an academic to host the very first discussion panel with a bunch of other academics who I assume are joining me, but let's hope that doesn't backfire. So the panel discussion now, and it is a panel discussion, although I'm not joined by anyone right here. There's other people who I hope are going to be joining me up there. Deals with the title of corruption, Ubuntu, and philosophical coherence. We might have dropped the philosophical to make it more accessible, but it's about coherence between these two things. And as I say, I'm joined by 3 other panelists who are somewhere around the world, or joining us from other parts of this crazy continent, crazy great continent, and people who I have a great deal of respect for. So here they are. I'm joined by Prof. Mika Boerman. You're going to have to excuse my pronunciations. Boerman. Professor Simporan Tibai Girirwa. And Professor Jeff Goldman. So I told you they're all professors. I don't need to tell you that again. And by telling you they're professors, they're obviously all widely published. I don't need to tell you individually they're widely published. So let me just introduce them a little bit individually in terms of the bits that are not general. So Minka is based at Stellenbosch University at the moment. She is, among other things, the head of the Department of Philosophy there. And she's also heading up a unit for business ethics and public integrity in the Center for Applied Ethics. In terms of her research, I have to say I'm completely in awe of Minka in this regard, because besides business ethics, she lists post-structuralism as a research interest. Now, yeah, I don't know, those of you who don't know, post-structuralist comes from the French tradition. And I think the continental philosophers subscribe to the view that why write something in a simple way when you can write it in a complicated way? And so everything I've read from the French is just like utterly confusing and vexing, and particularly these post-structures. So Minka deserves a medal for being that. In a way, she's also a predecessor of mine, in the sense that she was the editor-in-chief of Ben Africa's journal, the African Journal of Business Ethics, from 2013 to 2016. The second panelist is Simporan. So Simporan hails from Burundi. He's our most distant delegate today, or panelist. He's affiliated to a number of universities, a whole portfolio of them. He's affiliated with the International Leadership University at Burundi, and in Rwanda, the Major Seminary, and also University of Lay Adventists. And he also heads up an institute called the Institute for Development and Economic Ethics in Burundi, and he's an editor of a journal, and you're going to have to excuse my pronunciation, Revue Éthique et Société. Review of Ethics in Society, I assume. And finally, we have Jeff. Now, you know, there's 2 types of management academics in this world. You have those who subscribe to the consensus, and you have those who just simply cannot abide any notion of consensus. And Jeff, like myself, is of this latter type. So he's, if you like, altogether rebellious, and he's built his career out of this, and it lands in this space which is broadly but quite euphemistically referred to as critical management studies. He's based at the University of Johannesburg, and needless to say, given his rebellion, they don't let him loose apparently on undergraduate students. He focuses on their postgraduate students. And yeah, they keep him incarcerated there, which is a safe space for people like he and myself. You don't want rebellious people influencing management students. That's important. Until they become postgraduates, and then they're corrupted anyway. As for myself, I'm a professor at UNISA. For those of you who are not from South Africa, that's the University of South Africa. And if you're to believe the common sense that's being advanced by the acting VC of our nearest neighboring university, or the former VC of a university which is strangely famous for a urination incident, then my affiliation means something. It means that I'm definitely useless, probably stupid, and almost certainly corrupt, because that's how UNISA has been currently labeled, which I think is a pretty good point to turn our attention to the business of the day, which is a discussion of corruption, Ubuntu, and philosophical coherence of these. So the aim of this is to have quite a scholarly conversation, and I apologize to those of you who are from a corporate environment. This is not an elevator pitch of 2 minutes. It's we want to try and dig a little deep into common sense narratives around these themes of corruption and Ubuntu and business ethics. Now you've noticed I keep on making reference to common sense, and I'd just like to point out that these references are a little bit more philosophical than they might appear. And I'm going to say a swear word here to those of you in corporate. The Italian Marxist, so that's a swear word, Antonio Gramsci, is famous for drawing a distinction between common sense and good sense. Okay, common sense are those things that we just generally accept as true without really bothering to think about whether they really are a good idea or not. And so, like when I was thinking about this panel and when I was having a conversation with the panelists before the meeting, I tried to paraphrase the common senses as I see them around these things of corruption, Ubuntu, and in my world anyway, and particularly as from the perspective of the editor of the African Journal of Business Ethics. And so they go like this. The first common sense is that corruption is obviously endemic to Africa, as opposed to pandemic around the world. Obviously an African problem. The second is that business ethics is obviously the antidote to this African problem of corruption. And the third is that Ubuntu can obviously be applied to make business ethics more ethical and therefore to solve the African problem of corruption. So that was the challenge to question these kind of common senses. So the way I'm going to structure this, the panelists who now are here, visible, hi guys, I'm going to give each of them about 8 minutes to give some opening remarks, and then I'm going to allow anarchy to reign, and we'll just see where this takes us. I'm going to do that until Yvonne tells us to stop. I'm not timekeeping after the initial 8 minutes. So Minka, I'm going to ask you to go first. Over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. All good.
Excellent. Good afternoon, and thank you to Neil and to Ben Africa for allowing me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. The first question posed by Neil is whether corruption is obviously endemic to Africa. This is an empirical question and necessitates that we look at the data provided in the 2022 Corruption Perception Index, where a score of 0 means highly corrupt and 100 means very clean. So South Africa scores 43 out of 100, which coincides with the international average, whereas the combined score for sub-Saharan Africa is 33 out of 100, which indicates a high prevalence of corruption in the region. I do think that two salient factors that further exacerbate the effects of corruption on African societies are the interplay of corruption and economic development and the systemic nature of corruption in many African countries. And I just want to expound briefly on these 2 points. So with regards to economic development, many African countries are not economically strong, with the consequence that the effects of corruption are often felt more intensely in Africa. That is, when money is diverted from services to the enrichment of a corrupt minority, the effects are visceral. Corruption not only impedes economic development, but also increases inequalities by undermining the effectiveness of social welfare programs. A good case in point is South Africa's National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS, which has recently been investigated for corruption and irregular procurement. Corruption at NSFAS has directly affected underprivileged young people, particularly Black people, who rely on the aid provided by NSFAS to fund their studies. However, these people are not the only victims of corruption at NSFAS. Since the economic pie is finite, any money invested in NSFAS is money that has been diverted from other state welfare programs. The poor and disenfranchised are thus collectively affected by corruption. With regard to systemic corruption, the claim is that unlike petty corruption, systemic corruption weakens the country's macroeconomic institutional infrastructure, which undermines necessary checks and balances, undermines investment potential, and reinforces the perception that it is impossible to do clean business in Africa. In South Africa, the era of state capture and the consequent findings of the Zondo Commission reinforced the systemic nature of corruption in our society. And moreover, it is uncontested that corruption has contributed to our junk status credit rating. Against this backdrop, I now turn to Neil's second question, namely whether business ethics can solve corruption. The empirical evidence to date is not encouraging, as there has not been a significant decrease in corrupt activity since the institution of the business ethics and governance regimes post-Enron. Across the applied ethics fields, research suggests that ethics training and teaching does not translate into more ethical practices at individual level, which is an interesting finding to note. To my mind, however, greed in the business world remains a fundamental problem. Whilst the pursuit of self-interest is inherent to capitalist logic and its incentive structures, greed, narrowly defined as excessive materialistic desire, is difficult or even impossible to mitigate against via business ethics teaching and training, simply because business ethics does not have sufficient teeth to root out greed. However, where business ethics and good governance can have a positive impact on corruption levels is by highlighting the importance of strong institutional cultures and governance systems, and to explicate the factors, processes, and systems that impact on institutionalization. Sound structures and ethics management programs can minimize opportunities and maximize penalties for corruption, and can also reinforce strong ethical cultures. This obviously requires competence, commitment, and willpower on the part of leaders. But I do think that good people create strong institutions, and strong institutions create good people. Like ethics, what counts as corruption is often a negotiated classification of behavior rather than an inherent quality of behavior. By emphasizing business ethics and strong governance practices, we can raise the bar of these negotiations. It is also interesting to note the massive impact of informal incentive structures on behavior. It is as difficult to turn around a corrupt institution or country as it is to drive a clean institution or country to corruption. This suggests that informal incentive structures, the way things are done here, reinforced by social learning, rather than formal policies, programs, and regulations, have a massive impact on a culture's appetite for corrupt activity. Lastly, I turn to Neil's third question. I just want to clear my screen here, apologies. Namely, whether Ubuntu can be applied to solve the problem of corruption. Early propagators of Ubuntu for business, Schutter and Nussbaum, for example, argued that Ubuntu embodies ethical insights that are both true and unique, and that are currently lacking from the global business ethics discourse. As Andrew West, however, points out, both the uniqueness of Ubuntu and the potential contribution of Ubuntu needs to be empirically and not just anecdotally verified. A problem is that Ubuntu is often conflated with a number of values, and appeals to Ubuntu can often ring vacuous. I like Thad Metz's normative principle of Ubuntu precisely because it is prescriptive and not descriptive, and therefore is capable of directing behavior. This principle prescribes the cultivation of harmonious relations premised on goodwill and solidarity. The emphasis on relationality can cash out in interesting ways. Dr. Skalk Engelbrecht and I, for example, show how a relation holder theory premised on fostering harmonious relations can counteract the shortcomings of stakeholder theory premised on the stakes of contracting parties. In our work, we explore the implications of relation holder theory for leadership practices, decision-making, ownership, profit-sharing, termination, and retrenchment. These implications are interesting in theory, but I think viewed within today's prevailing and indeed globalized and standardized business environment, also seem largely unworkable in practice. This, I think, is the problem. Right now, applying Ubuntu insights to business, which is largely undergirded by libertarian principles, feels like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. It is my impression that despite references to Ubuntu in the King reports, the uptake of Ubuntu in business practices has largely been an exercise in PR. In conclusion, I would venture that as a cultural praxis, Ubuntu's relational and communitarian underpinnings, which promote strong, caring, and responsive communities, may go some way towards deterring greed and corruption. As a normative principle of right action, however, it is difficult to see how Ubuntu can assist in rooting out corruption, simply because this ethical principle does not currently inform practice and therefore lacks positionality in the business world. Thank you.
Great, perfect, Nika, thanks. For those of you who don't know, praxis is a combination of theory and practice. It's just like I think I want to try and find one word in everybody's speech, which is just a little bit philosophical, and give you the glossary on that. I see Symphorium seems to have dropped off the call, if I'm not mistaken. So Jeff, I know I said I was going to ask you to speak last, but at the moment, if I can ask you to hop in now and give your thoughts, and hopefully Symphorium will join us just now.
Oh, Neil, I do see Symphorium in the room.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do see him, yeah.
Okay, in that case, Symphorium, if you can hear me and you're there.
Okay, thank you very much. I am there.
Excellent.
Okay.
We don't have a picture, but I assume
All right.
I can witness you. So over to you, Symphorium.
Although the internet is unstable, we try to go to speak quickly before it gets cut. Well, I myself in because I have already been presented in the overall presentation, but I want to just say that corruption is real and can hardly be denied without getting involved into contradictions. It is everywhere, but in different extents and degrees. As Michael Johnston says it arises in the ways people pursue, use, and exchange wealth and power, and in the strength and weakness of the state, political and social institutions that sustain and strain those processes. In fact, it is a phenomenon which possessions are concerned. Yes?
Maybe if you turn your video to say bandwidth Symphorium. Sorry. Thanks.
Okay. I hear you.
I can hear you too, so go for it now, Symphorium.
Okay. Yeah. Hello.
Symphorium, we can hear you.
Yeah, I hear you, but you don't hear me. Maybe.
No, we can hear you.
Okay, can I speak?
Please do.
Okay, all right. Okay, very good. I was saying that corruption, as Michael Johnson says it, arises in ways people pursue, use, and exchange wealth and power, and the social institutions that sustain and restrain the processes. In fact, it is a phenomenon which is as old as human civilization history. It is characteristic of both our human nature and the motivers would make us say it is thick of in international philosophy, corruption refers to decay or perishing. Yes? Hello?
Really, yeah, can you hear me?
You?
So we're really struggling with the connection.
I hear you.
We're really struggling to hear you. And so what I'm going to suggest is that we switch over to Jeff again. I do have your notes that you sent me, and it looks like you're sticking quite closely to the script for now. So we can try again after Jeff, and if that doesn't work, then I'll read your notes in, and we can have the conversation after that, if that makes sense. So Jeff, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay. Thanks.
Right, thanks, Neil, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for this this occasion. So to jump straight into it and to address the three questions that were posed by Neil. Firstly, is corruption endemic to Africa? Yeah, personally, I don't really think so. I think there's enough evidence and examples of ethical scandals and corruptions, and ethics scandals and examples of corruption that can be cited from all over the globe. So I think it's a bit of a misinformed notion to say that it's endemic to Africa. I do agree with Minka to an extent that it is more easily identifiable in poorer economies. It's easier to identify. It's easier to point the finger, if you can call it that, in poorer economies. Secondly, can Ubuntu be applied to make business more ethical? Yeah. Personally, I think that this is a bit of a noble mantra to throw around. But is it realizable or even feasible to pursue in the first place? I think is a real question we should ask. I think the whole idea of applying Ubuntu to make business more ethical is something that was popularized in South Africa, mainly through the efforts of some professors at Wits Business School in the mid-90s, and also through efforts of people like Lovemore Mbigi, Barbara Nussbaum, Ronnie Lessem, and the likes. But I think that's made Ubuntu to become a little bit commodified as a business consulting solution specifically. But also coincidentally, that sort of overlapped in time with the whole Enron scandal, and it just showed me at the end of the day that it's a bit dangerous to make a cultural value such as Ubuntu, to deify it almost, and to uplift it almost to the status of a holy grail that can cure the ills of unethical business conduct. I think that's a bit unfair, and it's an unfair expectation. I think it falls short in that respect. I think Ubuntu is a cultural value and should be respected as such. And it can inform business practice, yes. It can be used as an underpinning value, but I don't think it should be in sort of reified, sort of uplifted to the status of a commodity, sold as a business consulting solution. The way that it was passed off to be back in the day, and I'm glad it sort of fell flat in that effort. And it isn't passed off as that anymore, to the extent that it was. Because it remains, as I say, it remains a cultural value. It is not a business consulting solution. And I think the two should be separated. Can corruption be overcome through ethics initiatives? I think in the post-truth society, I'm not quite sure anymore. I think the whole idea of ethics itself and ethical solutions, put it that way, has lost its luster for me a bit, because of the fact that ethics itself has become so contextual in our modern society. As I say, in a post-truth society where ethics is literally in the hands of the person that writes the tweet, or it's literally made up as we go along. And I think the line between what's right and wrong and what's acceptable and unacceptable in this post-truth society is blurred and sometimes completely flipped around. So I'm often tempted to actually forego the ethical distinction, and actually make a distinction in terms of what is virtuous and not so virtuous, or what is morally correct, or not so morally correct. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
Cool, perfect. Thanks, Jeff. I just want to check, Simporan, are you around? Are you in the room? And can we try again one more time? I think, if I'm not mistaken, you were busy making reference to Michael Johnson's quote, which says, "It arises in ways people pursue, use, and exchange wealth and power, and in the strength or weakness of the state, political, and social institutions to sustain and restrain those processes." Simporan, if you're there, do you want to carry on? Let me let you try and carry on. Thanks.
Okay. I don't know. My internet is unstable. I don't know whether you hear me.
We can hear you now perfectly. Let's talk quickly so we can
Hello. Okay, very good. Let me try before it gets cut. I was saying that corruption is real and it can hardly be denied without getting into contradiction. It is everywhere, but in different extents and degrees. As Michael Johnston says, it arises in the ways people pursue, use, and exchange wealth and power, and in the strength or weakness of the state, and social instance that sustain the restraint
Symposium, I'm afraid it's not working. So
I
I'm
believe that would
going to
say,
read your talk.
yes.
Or try to, and try to do it justice. But I'm sure I won't put the emphasis where the emphasis is meant. But let me try. So at the moment, Symposium is talking about the fact that corruption is real, and he's about to mention that. In fact, it's a phenomenon that is as old as human society and civilization. It's a characteristic of weak human nature and moral failure. As Christian believers would say, it's a characteristic of the human fall. In traditional philosophy, corruption refers to decay and perishing. As a natural scientist, this is my own aside, it refers to rotting. To say that something is corrupt means that it has decayed or is dying. So is it for our economy, politics, society, and human identity. And I think that's an important reference in Symposium's message, human identity. Corruption is reality, it's experienced on a daily basis. And he mentions that he comes from the 5th most corrupt country in the world, according to the 2022 Corruption Perception Index, which is Burundi. And we're going to have to come back to this Corruption Perception Index in a bit, but for now, let me carry on with Symposium's message. Burundi is followed by South Sudan and Somalia. And in fact, the most corrupt countries in the Corruption Ranking Index seem all to be found in Africa. So corruption is indeed endemic to Africa, according to this empirical index. What seems to be a platitude is that all the highly ranked countries happen to be the poorest ranked countries as well. In these countries, a poor economy feeds poor politics and poor governance. Burundi, Somalia, South Sudan are also the poorest countries in the world. There seems to be a connection between corruption and poverty. Poverty feeds corruption, low income, low salaries, joblessness, poorly equipped administrators is such that those with whatever power use it or to their advantage. But also corruption feeds poverty itself, insofar as corruption is a threat to the economic development of a country, as required resources are deviated from their due purpose, and certain businesses find it difficult to invest in such risky and corrupt countries. We're going to have to have a conversation about that too. Doesn't mean that the poor cannot be virtuous. So as to reverse this dire situation, doesn't mean that corrupt countries are unredeemable. It is often argued that business ethics can help Africa to set free Africa's most corrupt countries from the trap of corruption, provided it takes seriously the traditional African values of Ubuntu. At first sight, yes. I myself have held the argument that at various discussions in various forums. Yet such an answer is somehow naive. We have this notion of naivety coming through again. Business ethics, whether it relies on abstracted moral values or traditional values such as Ubuntu, cannot be taken to act in a mathematical way. Ethics is not mathematical science. We need to realize that corruption deprives people of their ontological density. And I'm going to have to ask Symposium just now to elaborate on what he means by ontological density as a foundation of human aspiration to what is good and right. It puts a brake on our sustained move to moral life, to corrupt people, as corrupt people tend to give priority to calculative rationality, with its short-term dividends over comprehensive rationality, which gives access to lasting results characteristic of the common good. It gives priority to individual over society. Some countries in Africa are trying to fight corruption as much as in a much resolute way. This shows that the political will of leaders is needed. Rwanda, Botswana, among others, have been a case in point. My experience is that the political will succeeds in dealing with petty corruption, but fails to deal with grand corruption of big business. Business ethics plays a greater role in creating more awareness of the evils of corruption in society and business. The responsibility of business ethics is to show that virtue pays, that ethics and integrity in business leads to lasting results. But still, I think people need to be called back to their ontological density, there's that phrase again, as human beings. By ontological density, I'm referring to Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is ontological density for Symposium. Drawing on Ubuntu means that we do not give priority to what gives us individual gains, but instead give priority to what benefits society as a whole. So much that the individual also benefits from it. So there's this notion, so put the society first and the individual will follow, which is very un-Western. Undoing corruption requires engaging in deep reflection, coupled with sacrifices of ourselves for the good of the other, and getting rid of ourselves of self-interested desire, getting rid of ourselves of self-interested desires. In this way, I can say that business ethics, which draws on Ubuntu, could help to move from our perishing, decaying humanness to morality, to an ontological density. In fact, to the restoration, there we go, of our ontological density of human beings, or as human beings, as the very context of the good life free from corruption. And that was Symphorian's presentation. And so I'm going to now invite some comments. I mean, I have a couple of questions which have struck me, and that's the corruption perception index, which we're going to have to talk about. But let me hand it over to the audience first before I monopolize discussions. So I don't know if anybody has any questions for our audience. Okay, cool. I'm going to go out to the back. I think I have the only roving microphone. They always say in presentations you should move around the lecture. So here we go.
I'm Eccles. I'm an engineer by training, and Symphorian made a very interesting comment that I need to react on, and that is that ethics is not mathematical science. I hold the position that ethics is, in most instances, a priori defined, and therefore it is possible to measure in a very scientific way. And in South Africa, our courts, the civil courts, use Bayes' theorem principles to say, on the balance of probability, we need to decide whether something complies with our rules that is defined in our laws, regulations, and so forth. Which means that I would like to ask why ethics, in terms of a priori rules, cannot be mathematically or at least scientifically, in terms of Bayes' theorem, be assessed to determine whether we comply with it or not.
So normally people take 3 questions and then 3 answers and stuff like that, but I think it breaks up the engagement. So Symphorian, I don't know if you want to respond to that question on whether ethics can be mathematicized, or anybody else, but Symphorian, the question was initially addressed to you, so I'll let you have a first go if you're with us.
Is it a question addressed to me?
Yeah, so in your talk you said ethics is not mathematics, and I think the question was really, is it possible to mathematicize ethics? Is it possible to quantify whether something is ethical or less ethical? I'm paraphrasing quite loosely. So if you want to have a first go.
Well, I very well, because it is there is interference.
Okay. Any of the other delegates? Minka, you're the most pure philosopher amongst us, so maybe I should hand over this thorny question to you, and then Jeff, as a hybrid philosopher like myself, we can have a crack at it too.
Okay, thank you. So whether ethics is measurable, or at least whether we can evaluate certain behaviors according to ethical systems, depends on what ethical system you follow. So, for example, Kant's categorical imperative, so Kant's normative ethics, and Mill's greatest happiness principle, these things are not quantifiable in the mathematical sense, but they're different definitive outcomes. Mill would ask, Did your action maximize the utility of everybody who was affected by the action? And if the answer is yes, then it's a moral action. Kant would ask, does your action, does it conform to the moral rule? Does it conform to the categorical imperative? Can it be universalized? Are you treating people as ends and not means? And if the answer is yes, then obviously the action is ethical. Other ethical systems, however, are not rule-based. Virtue ethics is an example thereof, where the good life is more intangibly defined or characterized. The good life is spent seeking for the good life. You learn through the example of others. It's about knowing which virtues to enact in which context, and that takes practical wisdom called phronesis, according to Aristotle. So on the virtue ethics viewpoint, ethics isn't such crisp evaluations of ethical outcomes is not always possible. But I think the important point here is that the business environment in which we function today is often very complex and very overdetermined. So knowing precisely what the correct course of action is difficult. Moreover, the sort of right answers, if you will, of these different normative theories often contradict. And so you cannot abdicate your moral responsibilities. So where normative ethics helps us is it does help us to think through what is right and wrong in a specific situation, but we cannot put our agency or our responsibility on the rule. Moral theories are not recipes that if we follow, then we are abdicated of all moral responsibility. We need to still assume responsibility for the rule in everything that we do. Because sometimes applying even a normative ethical theory to a specific situation can give us a very bad outcome. And we see that specifically with utilitarian ethics. So yes, in a very narrow sense, some rule-based ethical systems are quantifiable or we can evaluate the outcomes according to certain principles. But I don't think that ethical action as such always conforms to a rule. Individual agency, individual decision-making, and individual responsibility for the rule is still required.
Yeah, I would have agreed with you completely until the beginning of this year when I saw the developments of artificial intelligence, which really is a mathematical device in its background. I'm beginning to wonder whether we're not moving into a space where the maths is more complicated and thoughtful than the human in some ways. And perhaps that's going to become even more self-fulfilling or self-fulfilling prophecy as we become stupider, as we get alienated from the capacity to think as humans. But anyway, that's very simple. I think Nick has gave a comprehensive answer to that, so I'm going to go to the next question.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm not sure it's a question, it's more. Oh, sorry. My name is Judith Fazenda, and I am an ethics officer and part of the Ben Africa Advisory Board. So I have some comments, and maybe in the middle there's a question. So I think that one of the things, and from what I've been hearing, is a bit of a belief that when we say could Ubuntu help on the fight of corruption, as if it's a magic, some kind of magic potion that would then bring the solution. So I don't think that's the point. I think it's more in terms of understanding how, at this point, on the anti-corruption space, when you talk about ethics and anti-corruption, for a lot of people, it's as if you were talking a different language. In terms of, a lot of people see the values and everything as very Western, and not African. And that's where Ubuntu and other values that are African come in the translation of the anti-corruption initiatives of ethics is starting to speak to people in Africa in their own beliefs. And a lot of the African beliefs, like Ubuntu and values, bring exactly the same values that we're trying as academics, for some as ethics officers, as people working in this area, and anti-corruption specialists. The messages we're trying to bring are translatable. They are part of an African principle-based culture. And that's where Ubuntu comes, is exactly to help us mold the conversation in an African perspective, the basis of African culture. So I think that's my main contribution, is the perspective from where we address these issues, from where we discuss them. And in terms of utilitarian normative ethics, I think that when we speak of ethics, we're talking about virtue, we're talking about aspiration, and we're talking about values, where we're actually saying it's not a very normative thing, it's more in terms of equipping people with values that help them be able to rationalize problems and always try to apply their values when they coming up with solutions and decisions, where they include the other, where they make a balance on their decisions, not to affect negatively or more negatively than it's possible the other person.
I think that was a comment. I don't know if anybody. Hello, Jeff's cat. So I'm going to go to the next question to let the audience talk for a bit, and we can come back with comments ourselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Chrissy Dube and I represent Good Government Africa. Mine is more of a comment that leads to a question. I think that I'm very appreciative of the fact that the first speaker, Prof, did introduce greed to the equation, because if we look at it from a practical perspective, greed is actually a driver of corruption. And to put it bluntly, why isn't money that's made for maintaining roads used to entirely maintain the roads? It's because of greed. Or why isn't money that's meant to be allocated to public healthcare or education meant, or for any other department, why isn't it being utilized fully in that? And again, it speaks to greed. And I did see that Prof said that, good people create good institutions, and then ultimately good institutions, create good people. But if we look at it from a greed perspective, if you put a basket of fruits, healthy fruits, together, and then you just put one fruit with mold, you find that most of the fruit in that basket could be corrupted. So how do we then mitigate, the bad people or the greedy people who will obviously push for unethical behavior? And how can institutions be less tolerant to unethical behavior? Because if you look at it from an operational perspective or an HR perspective, unethical behavior is highly tolerated in institutions. It would need to get to something as severe as maybe theft, and still then it needs to be proven without a reasonable doubt. We can see this with Dr. Matthews, who's recently been released because there isn't enough evidence to show that he implicated or pretended to be a doctor. But how can we then, as institutions or as businesses, mitigate the tolerance levels of unethical behavior? Thank you.
We might have to go back to our constitutional law, which is perhaps problematic in South Africa. I'm going to let the audience go here, guys. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to leave it to audience.
Hello, my name is Deji Hastrop. I also represent DGA. I want to direct my question to Professor Omenka. I can't say the last name, but I'm sorry if I didn't get it from the
We're on a first name basis.
Okay, so, thank you. I noticed you asked a question, why doesn't ethics training and teaching translate to improved ethical business? And I wonder if it has to do with the fact that for cultures to thrive and be sustainable, they must have a philosophical foundation. And this brings us to the question of Ubuntu. Is it the fact that there is no philosophical grounding in translating the theory of ethics to the practice of business that is the problem? I'm just wondering. Thank you.
Okay, so Minka, that was a direct question. So maybe if you want to respond as quickly as you can, because we're running out of time, and there's one more comment. Thanks.
Sorry, just the last bit. Why is there, the last bit of that question was, is there no philosophical grounding to business ethics? Was that it?
No, the point facing is that could it be that the reason why theory doesn't translate into practice is the lack of philosophical grounding?
Okay. Business ethics as a subject, I mean, if you look at all the theories, they all do have some type of philosophical grounding. Stakeholder theory, for example, is based on libertarian philosophy and so forth. I don't think that is necessarily the problem. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I thought about this question a lot in the past, and I still don't know quite how to answer it. But if I had to give a tentative response, I would say, and as I did in the talk, I think the value of business ethics teaching and training is by giving us, you know, the language, the tools, the systems which reinforce ethical behavior in business. But I don't think those things necessarily are a replacement for business ethic or ethical behavior. So in the business world, as I said, I mean, knowing sometimes what the morally correct thing to do is tricky, because it is a very complex and overdetermined environment. And there, business ethics can help you to analyze and to identify ethical problems. There's a business ethicist who says a lot of ethical problems don't come waving a red flag. Analyze these problems and find solutions to them, but they have to be undergirded by a sort of, I think, ethical orientation. And that ethical orientation, I think, is not a matter of philosophy. That is a matter of sort of moral socialization. That is, we learn our values from different institutions, such as religious institutions, schools, families, and so forth. And these values must also be submitted to critical scrutiny, because they are passed on to us through a process of social and culturalization, and we don't submit them to scrutiny. And there, something like business ethics or ethics in general can help us to submit them to scrutiny. But that's what motivates us. It's not the theories that motivate us. It's our own inclination, our own values, our own moral systems. And I think where ethics training and teaching can help is by helping us to cash out these values, and philosophy can also help in that sense, to cash out these values within a practical context. But I don't think that they can act as or formal academic business ethics cannot act as a replacement or cannot teach us these moral systems.
I'm a venturer. A comment worthy of Jeff, in the sense that it is possible that the philosophical grounding of business is greed. And if you launch from that point of view, then it becomes a very difficult conversation to have. But that's a difficult, and it's showing my Marxist roots, because it's Marx's coercive force of competition. So let me keep quiet.
Too much. Good. On the subject of greed, I went to Harvard Business School, and they say they invented greed there. We didn't talk much about ethics when I was there. We said, if you want to talk about ethics, go across the river where MIT is there. But more to the point, for over 30 years, I've lived in Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, DR Congo. Now, you guys just won the World Cup in the rugby. Well, Nigeria gets the silver gold medal every year in corruption. Corruption is the biggest industry in Nigeria. It affects everything. A little kid, 10-year-old, who's selling groundnuts on the street has to pay 4 bribes a day to get by. He pays the local government guy, he pays the police, he pays the thugs, and he pays his grandmother who collects money from everybody on the street. So the point is that I can tell you a little bit about corruption, having run manufacturing companies in Nigeria, I've run a multi-location hospital, and also, was involved in the media. We were doing movies and whatnot. So the thing is, it is such a large part of the economy. In Nigeria, it's bigger than oil, it's bigger than agriculture, it's bigger than Hollywood. It starts with paying people off to do anything. And of course, that has affected electricity. You guys have 35,000 megawatts of power with about 70 million people. Nigeria has 230 million people. They have less than 5,000 megawatts. for that. So therefore, when I was in college, they say bring your own bottle, BYOB. In Nigeria, it's bring your own infrastructure. You provide your own electricity, you provide your own water, you provide your own security, and you provide your own entertainment. There's only that you can just have some resources and go and get it. So I'll serve as your unofficial corruption expert, since I'm in the gold standard place for corruption over much of my professional career. So I listen to all you professors using your $13 words, but I'm sort of the Empire Strikes Back. I'm the Empire. So you can come to me on the practical aspects of corruption.
I thought you were talking about Switzerland when you said the most corrupt country on the planet. But Switzerland, of course, in the corruption perception, comes out at number 5 at the top because clearly it's not corrupt. But okay, I think we're done. So on that note, I just want to say thanks to my panelists. I'm not sure if Semporian is still in the room, but thanks, Semporian. Thanks for sending your documentation so we can still have it. Thanks, Minka. Thanks, Jeff. We're going to have to sustain this conversation afterwards, and hopefully we will be able to sustain it with members of the audience as well over tea here. And in the foreseeable future, I'm not sure if our email addresses are on the link, but I think it would be fantastic to have conversations going forward. Thanks very much, everybody.
Give Prof another clap until he gets there. We have a lesson or two to learn from that virtual process, right? And I think I'll give you one of it, and this one is for you, Prof. A symphonian moment. So you have to be very careful when you are getting into virtual meetings. The lesson, have a plan B. And so we appreciate Siborian for that presentation because it covered the day. It's time